Good evening and welcome to Racing Rules Series 2, Introduction to Match Racing. My name is Kate McGregor. I'm 3 times world champion and competed in the match racing discipline at the London 2012 Olympics. And tonight I'm joined by international umpire Craig Mitchell. Thanks for joining us, Craig.
Good evening, Kate. Hope all is well with you.
Yeah, all good, thank you. It's been a weird time for everyone, so I'm sure that everyone's keen to learn more about match racing rules from you.
Yeah, hopefully. Well, we'll just go through the discipline, and hopefully people will then be able to get out onto the water and enjoy their match racing.
Yeah, so one thing that is quite tricky with match racing is you can go into a lot of different scenarios, as Craig will explain as we go through the PowerPoint. We are going to try and tell you about the differences between fleet racing and match racing, then the changes and additions to the racing rules. Then we'll go around the course, looking into some of the more common rules that are broken or that occur throughout match racing. Then going into the differences in the strategy and tactics from fleet racing, and then the introduction to how you can work with the umpires. So because there is a lot of rules that we're going to cover, we'll try and not go into too much detail for it to get too confusing. But if you can grab a copy of the rule book and then join us in the next few slides of around the course. So starting off with the course, the match racing course is a Windward Leeward course. Usually it is 2 laps, and there's more chance of there being a leeward gate. One thing you may find is that match racing is a very spectator friendly sport or discipline of sailing, so you may end up going to events where the courses are really short, in which case you do more laps, which actually for the bow is not very fun, but it's like I said, spectator friendly and really good fun discipline to get involved in. So the starting area is slightly different to fleet racing. The battle basically starts between the 2 boats at 4 minutes. So you have a starting sequence of 10 or 7 minutes, then it goes into 5 minutes, and then at 4 minutes you enter. We'll show a diagram after this slide of what that actually means. You then normally have a 1 minute hooter and a sound signal with a flag, and then at 0 you go. Okay, so you have to be outside of the assigned end of the start line at 4 minutes. You're assigned a colour before the race. The yellow flag goes at the starboard end, and the blue flag goes at the port end. You then have to enter the start line within the 2 minutes of entering. This is then down to the umpire decisions. So Craig, can you just explain to us what happens if you don't enter within the 2 minutes?
Yeah, so there's the 2 parts, like you explained there. You're going to be outside your assigned end at the 4-minute signal. If you're not outside your assigned end, then that's an automatic penalty, and that's judged by the umpires who are sitting down at the pin end, one umpire and a wing boat up at the race committee boat, watching to make sure you're outside the assigned end. You've then got to cross the line from the windward side to the pre-start side to the race side, the course side, within 2 minutes. So at the 2 minute signal, the race officer will have been watching the boats to make sure that they both entered. And if a boat hasn't entered correctly, then they'll put up a flag on the race committee boat, and then there'll be a penalty assigned there. And it's normally a bit of a game between the race officer and the umpire, in that the race officer will put the flag up at the 2 minute, and then he'll start counting probably over the radio to the umpires to to try and find out exactly how quick and how observant they are to get the penalty onto the boat. Certainly I've been at events where the umpires haven't been watching what was going on, and a minute later the race officer's still waving his flag and there's no penalty gone. So that's something that the umpires take care of.
Yeah, it often catches newcomers to match racing out because they understand the 4-minute entry but don't realise that you have to actually enter beneath the start line within the 2 minutes. So thank you for explaining that.
And if you do fail to enter within that 2-minute period, then there's no requirement to do it. So you know, once you've got your penalty, you know, you just forget about it and move on, and the requirement's no longer there.
Great. I think the next slide shows a little diagram of the boats entering, so you can see what, here it is. So we've got the blue at the pin end, yellow at the starboard end, and then they can't cross what you effectively call the H before the 4 minutes. Then they go down beneath the start line and then come together.
Yeah, so this is what we call the sort of classic dial-up, because the blue boat coming in there on port has got to keep clear of the yellow boat, and so their options are to try and they can try and cross ahead, they can try and cross above, enter and then try and cross above, but often you'll see this this classic dial-up position where the blue boat comes in, watching the boat on starboard, going through, making sure they tack fully onto starboard tack, so then they're the leeward right of way boat, and from there then you start the pre-start dancing then starts. So back to you, Kate, to discuss what it is you're trying to do in the pre-start.
So there's a bit of a known go zone in the pre-start. So you don't want to be in the bottom left-hand corner as you look at the course upwind. That corner is what we call the danger zone, or some people call it the coffin area, because it's really hard as a sailor to get out of it. So what you're aiming to do is to try and push the game as far across to the committee boat, but beneath the start line as possible. So as Craig mentioned, we've got the dial up, but we also may have situations where it's so pin biased that you may be able to cross high, in which case you go around the front of the committee boat, or you may be able to cross low if it's a starboard end bias. So you have to think about all of those things, but basically the aim of the game is to try and get across to that right-hand side of the committee boat. We've got a few rules in the pre-start, which there's a few differences. So one of them, if you go into a dial-up, you're quite often going to go backwards quite quickly. So Craig, can you just explain to us the differences of the going astern in match racing to fleet racing?
Yeah, so in fleet racing, if you start going astern by backing a sail or sideways, then you become a keep clear boat, and that rule has been deleted by match racing, and so it just really makes it easier to see for the umpire to judge those transitions between boats going forwards, stopping, and then going backwards under a sail. And so in those situations, the boat that then starts going backwards retains their right of way if they're on the same tack, but that boat also has obligations under Rule 16 when they're altering course. And so whether you're going forwards or backwards, the rules there's no change in the rules, and so that's certainly one for potential match racers to get their head round and use it to their advantage.
Great. And then assuming that the port boat has managed to get out of the dial-up, we then go into the playground effectively. So what you may see if you've been watching YouTube videos on match racing, you may see the circling that happens in match racing. And some people think that they're just doing it for the fun of it, but actually it's all about the time and distance and how far away from the line you are. So those circles are basically each boat is trying to pick their moment to then come back to the line. So when you are circling, you always want to make sure that you're jibing onto starboard. If you try to circle the other way, the likelihood is that you will get a penalty on yourselves, as port starboard occurs. You would then try to lead or push into the start line. So what you may be looking for here is, in lighter winds, you're likely to want to lead back to the line because it's on your terms, on your time. So you're circling to try and pick that specific time. And hopefully, once you've got a bit more practice, you'll know when those times will be. Or then if it's windy, you want to do the opposite. So you'd want to push back to the line, in which case you're pushing the lead boat to try and get them over the line and take control of the pre-start. There's a few little differences here. So when you're leading or pushing, some people may have heard of fishtailing, in which case it leads on to Craig with the Rule 17 situation.
Yeah, so as you're leading or pushing back to the line, you're trying to as the boat behind, you're trying to get an overlap on the boat ahead, and you go from a giveaway boat into a right-of-way boat, and as you become that right-of-way boat, then you've got to give room to the now windward boat to keep clear, and so the windward boat's going to be keeping clear, potentially breaking the overlap and then re-establishing the overlap, and that's a dynamic situation that you're going to get as you lead back. And so the skipper's probably going to be relying very much on the bow person on the bow to tell them, are they overlapped? Can they bear away? Can they luff? And so that they know, at what point they're going to be able to get the hook there to be able to force the other boat away, or if you're the boat ahead, that you're clear and that the other boat can't attack you. One big rule change in match racing is the deletion of Rule 17, which is course restrictions. So there's no proper course restrictions when you're no matter where you overlap from. So if you overlap from astern, it doesn't matter. In fleet racing, it does matter. In match racing, it makes no difference. And so that can come into the tactics of the start as well, because as you come in from astern after the start signal, then there's no proper course restrictions, and so boats can luff as they please. So the deletion of Rule 17 makes a very big impact on the game, and it's something that new match racers really need to have a good read at and understand how they're going to use it to best effect. The other bits in the pre-start are then also obstructions as well, and using obstructions to best effect to either trap people or to get out of trouble. Because often match racing gets put into very, very tight areas and gets back down onto the shore so that spectators can enjoy watching the spectacle. And so getting a handle on what you can and can't do with those obstructions is certainly something that you need to look at as well. Anything to add, Kate, on the lead or push the overlaps?
No, it's just I think it's just a really tough time for the helm, because they're looking back at this time or looking forward, focused on that other boat. So it's a perfect time for the team dynamic to come in. And I think a lot of people think that it's all on the helm in match racing, whereas actually you need the crew to be calling the time and distance, calling how far away from the line they are, whether that's in boat lengths or in seconds. It's just a really key dynamic time that is basically could be the winning move of the race in a way. If you win that pre-start, then you're laughing, really.
Absolutely. And then the one other thing that potentially comes into the pre-start area is the Rule 42, which everyone is the pumping rule, and there's a change in that in match racing, and that sculling's allowed as long as you're not propelling the boat forwards. And so when you're in the dial-up situation, you'll see people using the helm to try and keep themselves head to wind. But also that rule applies, between the warning and the preparatory. And certainly this is so that if there's events where boats have engines, that you've got to switch the engine off at the 5 minute rather than the usual 4 minutes. So that's just one to be aware of.
Great. And then one other area of pre-start is, as we said, there's a lot of action, and this could be quite a key time for getting penalties. So it's important to highlight that the penalties, if you undo a penalty before the start, it doesn't count. All penalties have to be taken after the start gun. It's often something that catches people out when they think that they've got rid of their penalties when actually the flag's still flying. We will go into more detail about the penalty later on in the show though. So if we go on to the next slide, which is the Windward leg to a Windward Mark. So here, as a sailor, you're basically trying to protect the right. You leave all the Windward Mark to starboard in match racing. So you're always trying to get that starboard advantage, trying to catch the other boat when they're on port. You're not aiming to get a penalty on them, but you're just trying to take control of the situation, which basically means that it's easier to do when you're on starboard in the right-of-way boat. There's a few different scenarios in a windward leg. We won't go into too much detail on them, but for example, you often want to tack to cover. This is basically trying to keep between you and the mark, your opponent and the mark. You need to make sure that the opponent's not going to go around you. And even if you're really, really confident that the left is the right side to go, if your opponent's going that way, you may want to just keep an eye on them and just do a cover, whether it's a loose cover or a tight cover. One tricky situation though is if you tack too close. Craig, can you explain from a rules point of view what might happen if you tack too close on a windward leg, and if there's a windward leeward call, or could you take us through that?
Yeah, there's a couple of different situations. Your main one is if you're having a port starboard crossing situation and the starboard boat tacks on top of the port boat, and then an overlap's then established, then that boat that was tacking becomes a giveaway boat, and so they're giving up the right of way, and so there's quite a lot of risk there. And a good time to attack by that leeward boat to be able to force the boat to windward away back over to the left-hand side. You've also got lee bow tacks where potentially if the boat on starboard is trying to protect the right-hand side, they'll tack close to leeward of the boat coming in on port. But again, if that boat on port, they could dip and accelerate and maybe catch the tacking boat unawares and force them away to that left-hand side. So you do have the power of the right, but at the same time as that boat with that power of the right, you've got to be careful not to give that power away. And so, when you're getting into close quarters maneuvering, you've got to be careful of when you're giving up the right of way.
Great. And then another situation in the windward leg, which is very different to fleet racing, is a dial down. So a dial down can go very wrong, and if you're learning how to match race, you'll probably get it wrong before you get it right. Even the professionals still have their timings a little bit out. So it may be that you're trying to get the boat coming in on port to do a big duck just to gain that little bit of advantage. It may be that you like the left-hand side more, so you're trying to push that other boat to the right-hand side. It's just little gains that you're trying to make throughout the race. Obviously, this is quite a big rules implication, and often there's some flags flying at this point. So Craig, can you just take us through the rules of a dial down?
Yeah, so we've got a little diagram here, and we'll just let it roll through. So essentially, the boat on starboard here has all the rights and is trying to control really the boat coming in on port. And so what they're looking to do is just to make life difficult for that boat on port. So they'll turn away from the wind, they'll dial down in order to force something to happen, and they're either trying to force them to tack, or they're trying to force them to go extra distance. So whilst they accelerate, having borne away, the port boat will have had to have steered too far, used too much rudder, slowed down, and that will give them more distance forwards, so that when they meet again, then the yellow boat there will be able to cross ahead again and regain the right. The difficulties with this maneuver are that as that yellow boat there, the right-of-way boat on starboard, as they bear away and change course, they've got to give room to the blue boat to keep clear as they're altering. And so you'll see quite a lot of dynamics of how early that yellow boat will dial down. Do they dial down before the blue boat? Do they dial down after the blue boat? The blue boat's always required to keep clear, but they may be given some opportunity and some room. They may be required to be given some room by the yellow boat if they're turning too close. And so it's a very difficult maneuver, and probably not one that someone learning is going to get right. But when you get a good dial down and you make it work, then it's a great maneuver. But definitely one for the medium to advanced sailors.
It can definitely be pretty scary as you see the boats bow to bow coming together as well. You just got to have confidence in your helmsman at that point that they're going to turn up at the right time or down.
Absolutely. And the yellow boat there is limited by how far they can dial down as well, which is 90 degrees below a proper course, basically, which is essentially 90 degrees from the true wind. If they're seen to be going below what would be deemed a proper course, then they'll end up with a penalty, and that comes into the call book, which we'll talk about a little bit later.
Great. So we've just touched on the windward leg slightly there. A lot of the rules are very similar to fleet racing, so I think it's important not to overcomplicate it. At the end of the day, you're trying to sail fast and stay between your opponent and the Windward Mark if you're in the lead. So we've done the windward leg, we've now got to the Windward Mark. And even since I've been match racing, these rules have changed quite a bit. So it's even for us who regularly match racing, there's still a few tweaks here and there that we need to get right, just because it is very different to fleet racing. So I guess the biggest difference is that the zone goes from 3 lengths to 2 hull lengths, which is quite a key thing to remember. Also, if you're doing lots of fleet racing at the time of your match racing, it's important to remember which one's which. So it's just 2 hull lengths in match racing. Mark room. So I'm going to pass this one on to Craig, because this is one of the changes that's happened in the last few years or so. So Craig, can you explain to us the mark room at the Windward Mark?
Yeah, and this is going to be a real, in a nutshell, explanation. I mean, I think if you we could have a whole course itself on the Windward Mark rules, but really this is a totally different concept to what you're used to in fleet racing. So getting a handle on what the mark room rules are is very important when you get into match racing, and will certainly help you. And so one major change is that the mark room is changed to give a proper course rounding. So that's the course to get around the course as fast as you can, which is quite a significant change from the fleet racing rules. And we'll come on to that in the different scenarios, because proper course is also can be a very grey area, and certainly what you think is proper course and what somebody else thinks is proper course can be quite different. And like I say, it's a completely different beast. This is the mark rounding rules that the high-speed classes use. So the GC32s, the M32s, the America's Cup, all have been using this high-speed rules version, and it is different and it changes the game a lot. Some people like it. There's some people that preferred the old system, but it's the system that we're using, and so you just got to get on and embrace it. And so this version of what we call Rule 18 applies when you're on opposite tacks, unlike in fleet racing. So when you're coming into that Windward Mark on opposite tacks, on port and starboard, as soon as you get into the zone there, then the Rule 18 does apply. Essentially, if you're overlapped, the inside boat gets mark room. And again, that mark room is, room to sail your proper course. And then if you're not overlapped, then it's the first boat to get to the zone that gets mark room. Now that we'll show a few little videos a little bit later, and that can be a very tricky one and a tricky concept to understand. And certainly, it's something where you have to think, okay, so is there an overlap? Well, who's going to get there first? And that can be open to a discussion, and that'll come in to working with umpires a little bit later. If you go outside of the zone and then you come back into it, then you reapply the mark room rule when the boats come back in again and are together. We'll show it in the videos in a second. Mark room, if mark room requires a tack, which it can, then you've got to tack no quicker than a proper course. So if you have to tack as you're coming into the Windward Mark, then you've got the inside berth, then you're not allowed to do slam tacks to attack the other boat. We've also got the same, or we've got pretty much, this is probably one of the few course restrictions that we've got out there. Rule 17 was deleted, which is the main one about course restrictions. But if you are coming into the mark and you're the right of way inside boat, then you are required to sail your proper course. And again, the proper course can be a grey area, and there's a lot of risk there for a boat that might sail beyond their proper course, and there's quite a few calls in the call book that cover that. So we'll go through a couple of scenarios which show the Windward Mark and how the things are different. So you see two boats approaching the Windward Mark here. Now under these rules, as we approach here, the yellow boat is entitled to mark room. The blue boat here on port has got to give that mark room, but there is a course restriction on the yellow boat in that they until they pass through head to wind, then they're required to sail no further than their proper course, and that can cause all kinds of interesting scenarios when boats are going slowly, when boats are accelerating, and if that yellow boat goes beyond their proper course, then the blue boat's going to be protesting. The blue boat's still going to be a port tack boat, keep clear boat, so they've still got to keep clear even if that yellow boat is going way beyond their proper course. So can be a really tricky scenario, and one that certainly is covered quite a bit in the call book. And getting your head around that concept is very important. We also get into another situation where we have boats as they approach here, and as they get to the zone, they are overlapped. And so the yellow boat there, even though that they're not on the ley line, they are the inside boat, and so they're entitled to room to sail their proper course around the mark. And so in that situation, they go in there, they tack. Again, they're not allowed to slam tack, but when they get there onto starboard, the blue boat there is on port, and so that the yellow boat there is then required to sail their proper course until they're then through head to wind. So again, that's very much different to fleet racing in terms of who's allowed to have their mark room. So again, and Kate, if you're looking at that situation from a tactical point, from the blue boats, what are you thinking about trying to do in that situation?
So you're just trying to, you've got to preempt a lot in match racing. So you need to be aware that the yellow boat gets room. And at that point, from a boat handling point of view, and also a tactical point of view for the downwind, which we'll go on to, is making sure that you're prepped and everything's ready to go. The worst thing that could happen here is that yellow comes in, gets mark room, they hoist the kite straight away and they're off. Whereas actually as blue, although it looks like a tricky situation, it actually sets you up quite well for the downwind leg, which we'll go into further. But basically, you need to preempt it and not slow as much as the yellow boat here. So trying to gain a little bit of height before you get to that situation where you need to give room is probably a good place to start.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also this this whole mark room rule is designed to get the boats around the mark, to push them around the mark. And so really you're kind of planning ahead is how can I get around that mark quick enough, and how can I gain an advantage out of you know, doing something a little bit more slick, you know, and how can I force that boat to do what I want rather than them having control and influence over you. So you're always thinking, you know, well, if I just luff here, is that going to be enough room? You know, do I have to tack? And like Kate says, to try and get prepped and ready to get that spinnaker up and get off down down to that leeward gate. The third little kind of anomaly here, or the difference between the Olympic set of rules and the match racing version of going around marks, is if you come in here and you're then clear ahead as you enter the zone. And as we saw from the previous slides, if you're not overlapped and you enter the zone first, then you get that mark room. So the yellow boat there is entitled to their mark room, and so they can tack in front of the blue boat. And that's probably something that's going to take a fleet racer by surprise, thinking, what's this guy doing? But you know, if you are clear astern, you've got to know it. So, Kate, any tips on what you would kind of look for doing in this situation?
Yeah, so one thing we do is we call the two boat ley line as well as the actual ley line. And then it just gives so as a bow person, that's something that I call back to the helm. So I'll be calling when we are on the ley line for the 2 boat length zone, just so that if we're in a position where we can get into the zone before that boat, we've already gained probably a boat length or 2 advantage on them, which is what you need in match racing. You're always trying to find those little gains. So from a strategy point of view, you're looking for that 2 boat length zone.
Okay, great stuff. Okay, so we've gone around the mark, and now we're heading off down to the Leeward Mark. So what are the pitfalls and what are the changes as we head downwind?
Yeah, so you've just seen, the Windward Mark can be pretty hectic. Obviously, the crew, the bow and the trimmers are trying to get the kite up as quick as possible. The helm's still looking at the other boat, probably wondering what's just happened. There's a lot going on, but straight away you need to click back into the race and leave what's just happened behind. So on the Leeward Mark, on the leg to the Leeward Mark, there are a lot of changes to fleet racing, and it's actually one of the more fun legs of the race. So basically, Rule 17 is taken out completely, which effectively means if the boat behind gets an overlap, they can sail that lead boat wherever they want. So as you're going around the mark, if you're the trailing boat, you want to try and sit on the lead boat's air as much as possible, just to try and gain that overlap that you're looking for. It then basically provides a situation where the boats end up as you're looking at the course, in the bottom left-hand corner of the course, and the boat with the overlap can basically keep sailing as far as they want for as long as they want. Obviously, if they go too far, they might end up getting in sticky situations themselves. So at that point, they are making sure that they have got the kite down, they're matching the other boat. There's a lot going on, and again, it's changed a lot since I first started match racing, and it is a tricky rule to get your head around. But you basically, as the lead boat, don't want to jibe too early because you could end up being sailed out on starboard for far too long. Is there any rules that I've missed out there, Craig?
No, I mean I think that's the main one, and certainly it's been a great weapon to the boat astern, and brings the action closer together, and it's one where the umpires are it makes life easier for the umpires with that rule deleted, because they don't really have to establish how that overlap was made. In the past, you had the double jibes where people would be jibing and trying to get that overlap on, but this which became very difficult because the umpires had to be in a position where they could see if overlaps were established, if they were broken. But that's all gone out the window. This does put, like Kate says, pushes the action into the bottom left-hand corner, and that can create more things going on, and certainly gives you opportunities if there's outstanding penalties to take penalties as you get into those areas. So hopefully that's and I think it has made the game more fun and interesting as you go downwind. Match racing also either uses leeward gates or single marks, the round to starboard, but you need to check, reading the sailing instructions, whether you're using gates or single marks, because that makes a difference on how you attack things, and certainly you don't want to be going around the wrong marks the wrong way.
No, that's
so. So we've got a situation here, which is an example of what we were just talking about, with the boat astern. So the yellow boat gets in there and gets their overlap and manages to force the other boat away from the mark. The blue boat there is trying to lunge down to get into that zone to get their mark room so they can get around the mark, and the yellow boat is attacking hard, trying to force them away from the mark, so that they can carry on the fight and hopefully get ahead. What have you got anything to add there, Kate, on the tactics of when you're the blue boat or the yellow boat, and what the counter moves are with trying to get ahead and get to that zone, or get that overlap and press the other boat away?
So if you're the blue boat, you're basically trying to push down without breaking the rules. So if yellow do have an overlap, any chance that they don't have an overlap, you're trying to bear away and soak as low as possible without regaining the overlap again. As blue, you're trying to get into that zone so that then yellow has to go around the mark with you. However, it often doesn't play out like that, and usually blue in this situation gets pretty stuck. So as the yellow boat, you're in control. Make sure you get your kite down early, because if blue gets it down before you, the likelihood is they'll probably get past you. So you're just trying to match each other's boat handling. So it's a good time to have some practice of reaching a tight reach and trying to get the kite down, and it being a bit manic. So it's just trying to stay on top of it. And again, like I said with the Windward Mark, just trying to preempt what is going to happen and not to rely on the helmsman at this point, because they've got a lot on, the bow's got a lot on. It's a really good time to work together again, and all of you as a team have to preempt it. It can't just be one person, otherwise it's bound to go wrong.
Yeah, I guess it's one of those set pieces, isn't it, and the communication of, okay, well, if we get the overlap in this situation, we can then press them, and we'll go down to a certain area, or we'll just carry on, and then either the bow makes the call or the skipper makes the call as to when you do the turn back, depending on how far round the blue boat's got. So there's a lot of communication and a lot of slick crew work required to make this maneuver stick.
Exactly, yeah. It can also be a challenge on the way to the finish, which is what we're next going to talk about. So a lot of action, especially if penalties have been picked up around the course. The last leg to the finish is going to be a time where you're trying to offload those penalties. So going on to the finish is not the spinnakers or the sails in match racing. It is just the hull, which again is a fairly recent change to the rules. A good time to do a penalty is at the finish line, usually around the pin end. If the pin end is biased, you may want to do your tack around the pin end to make sure that you get the penalty in and you've completed it and finish at the same time. It's quite a safe option. And one important factor for this is to make sure the head of the spinnaker is beneath the gooseneck. Otherwise, you can go to all of that effort and your penalty still stands. And you obviously, like in fleet racing, can't get in the way of the other boat whilst you're taking the penalty. Otherwise, it's likely you'll get another penalty if that happens.
Yeah, it's always a tricky manoeuvre, and it's always a very very tense time where the umpires are just trying to get themselves into position so that they can see when that spinnaker's down, and also when that penalty comes off, and then the amount of time that there is between that penalty coming off and potentially a starboard boat charging in there has to avoid them. And so it's quite an exciting time when the penalty comes off at the finish line.
Yeah, I think all the have a sweat on at this point.
Yeah, definitely. So there's quite a few other little changes that also we've covered most of the changes with the rules of part 2 in there, but then we've also got a few other little tricky changes that have been made. So touching a mark has been changed, so it's the hull and the crew only. Apart from a race committee vessel, you can't hit the race committee vessel with anything because that's considered quite dangerous, and so that rule was amended slightly from the initial version. But the crew aren't allowed to grab the mark and drag it behind them. And the other difference is that you haven't hit the mark unless the umpires say so. So if you hit the mark, then you just got to leave it to the umpires to decide whether you've hit it or not. There's no point gnashing teeth or anything about whether you hit it. If you do hit it and the umpires don't spot it, then you got away with it. And that's certainly one of the fundamental changes with match racing is that you if you break a rule, you wait you are allowed to wait for the umpires to tell you need to take a penalty. Of course, you can take a penalty of your own volition if you wish to, but that's something that probably doesn't happen that often. And the main reason to make that change was to really allow the umpires to focus on the match rather than whether a spinnaker sheet has it draped over the mark or as a line out of the back of the boat touched the mark. And really kind of no one was that concerned whether people were hitting the marks with booms or with mainsails or whatever. And so that was changed to just the hulls because that's the really kind of important bit. In terms of the way that a match racing is set up, it's set up in usually in flights, and that means that races follow each other at 5-minute intervals. And so there's another change in there which covers situations when matches meet each other, and that's kind of really sportsmanship. Is that you've got to conduct yourself in an order to win your own match, because there might be another match somewhere that makes a difference to your score in the overall tally, but you've got to race your match with the best outcome on that match rather than trying to interfere with somebody else on purpose. And also arm signals have been introduced to room to tack rule 20. So again, if match racing is often in close to the shore venues, if you get into situations where you are needing to ask for room to tack, then you've got some arm signals to learn because if you don't use the arm signals, then you haven't made that call. So that's certainly one to brush up on when you're getting into it, because you can shout all you like, but without the arms moving, then you haven't made the call. Anything else that you want to go through quickly on what we've covered there, Kate, on tactics or strategy?
No, I think it's just important to highlight again, and I'll keep repeating it, is that it is a sailing race, so it's really easy to get caught up on the rules and everything, and a lot of people start match racing with the aim to get a penalty on the other boat, which isn't necessarily true. You're just trying to race quicker and smarter than the other boat. If you get a penalty, then it's a bonus, but yeah, don't overcomplicate it. There are changes, but at the same time, it's just another sailing race.
Yeah, keep it simple and win the boat race.
Exactly. It's easy to get caught up in all of the other changes and differences to fleet racing.
Absolutely, and I think probably one of the biggest changes is comes then when working with umpires. Match racing's 99% of the time is done with umpires, and so we've got to look at and start working out that we've got some people behind us so that we're going to make decisions on all the rules of part 2, and so we're going to go through now through that whole system, and the umpires will be there. They'll be in a small powerboat following behind the action, and they usually work in pairs. Each of the umpires in the boat takes a boat. So normally, convention says that the driver follows the yellow boat and the other person follows the blue boat, but that's not 100% the case. And so they have a discussion between the two of them about what their boat is doing. They keep clear. Are they keeping clear? Are they right of way? What are their rights and what are their obligations? What are their opportunities to use the rules to best effect? So the umpires sit there and they respond to protests by boats. And so really in Appendix C there, there's the whole section you need to kind of get your head around, read through thoroughly about what these umpires are going to do, what they can do, what they can't do, and what they're expecting of you, because they are umpires, not referees. And so the main difference is that they respond to the competitors asking for a judgment. And so when the boat feels they've been infringed, they'll ask for a judgment from the umpires, and they'll signal that using the flag system that we'll talk about a little bit later. The umpires can also initiate penalties under certain circumstances, and altogether, all round, they work on a principle which is in the front of the match racing appendix there, which is the last point of certainty. And so that means that the umpires don't change, the state of a boat doesn't change. So if it's on starboard, it's on starboard until the umpires are sure that it's either tacking or it's on port. And so they can roll back to, what facts are we certain about in any given incident? And so the competitors, if they need to understand that that's the way that the umpires work, that they have this point of certainty. They'll also act as protest committee. So if there's things that you want to take ashore outside of the on the water rules, then they can act as a protest committee. But any advice on working with umpires, Kate?
You might get frustrated to start with, that's for sure.
I think I'd agree with you there.
I think it's really easy to get hung up on the rules situation that's just happened. So if you're starting up in match racing, just respect the umpire's calls. There's nothing you can do about it. It's a decision there and then. So you might as well get on with the race. It's easier said than done, and we've all had our moments where we're getting a bit grumpy with the umpires. But I think it's just important to try and move on as quickly as possible. And if that isn't happening with one person in your boat, you just need to all be like, okay, let's get on with it and get on with the race, because actually shouting at the umpires is not going to help you win. So I think that's the biggest thing from a sailor's point of view. Don't get hung up on it.
Yeah, absolutely. But they're also after the race, if you want to talk to them, give the umpires a wave and discuss the call, find out what they saw, and then you can start the discussion. My advice is to ask the umpire, what facts they base their decision on, because if you have different facts to what the umpires have, then you're never going to agree. And so at that point, that the discussion is going to be quite, it could be quite a lengthy discussion, in which case you can then talk about that when you go ashore. But certainly if you've got different facts, then you're going to remain having different facts most likely, and then so it's a time for a discussion somewhere else. We'll move on now to the process, which is how you actually go about protesting. And so, unlike in the fleet race, there's a special flag which the match racers use, and that's flag Y, which is a yellow and red diagonal striped flag. And so for rules of part 2, which is the port starboard, windward leeward, all those ones, if you think you've been infringed, then you initiate a call from the umpires by raising flag Y. If there's anything outside of those rules that you want to take ashore, so if someone rams your boat and there's damage, then you might want to say, well, that wasn't my fault, and so I want to have a hearing afterwards. So you would then display a red flag and to be able to discuss that ashore after the racing. There's also a number of things that you can't protest for, which is, again, hitting marks, breach of Rule 42, rocking, pumping, avoiding contact. If there's damage, then you can take that to a hearing, but you can't protest for Rule 14. If a boat enters early, then or doesn't make it into the start box, you can't protest for that. If the boat doesn't take its penalty properly, then you can't protest for that. But all these things the umpires are watching for, and certainly I'm sure that most sailors would be encouraging the umpires to focus on the other boat and what it is that they're doing, just to make sure that the umpires are trying to keep both boats honest. And also, you don't have to protest, do you, Kate?
No, I think that's a really good point. If you're in a 50-50 situation, or there's been a collision, or you're not sure which way it's going to go, you don't have to raise your flag. And if you're not sure, it's probably best not to, because you could end up worse off and actually getting a penalty yourself. If the umpires see a Y flag, it can be either of you. It won't just necessarily go to the other boat. So it's something to think about. Be safe.
Yeah, there's many times when I've seen an incident occur, and both skippers look behind them and go, "Oh, was that umpire in the right place to be on my side, or were they on the other boat's side?" And that there's been a rule broken, but both teams are not sure, so they just smile at each other and leave the flags in the bottom of the boat.
Yeah, discuss it in the pub later.
So you've put your protest in, and you're asking for a call from the umpires. So what is it that the umpires are going to do? Well, they've got a bunch of flags in their boat, and so if they don't think there's been an incident, then they'll put up the green and white flag, which means there's been no penalty. If they put up a yellow flag, it means that there's a penalty on the yellow boat, which is the boat with the yellow flag assigned in the pairing list, and then with the blue flag. If they put up a red flag with a colour, either blue or yellow, it means that the boat indicator has got to take a penalty immediately. We've discussed, mentioned earlier, that penalties may be delayed, but the red flag means that you've got to take that immediately, and that's because the umpires think that a boat's gained a controlling position after breaking a rule, so they try and unpick what's happened by forcing the boat to go back to where they were. We've also got the black flag with a colour, which means that the boat indicated has been disqualified. And there's quite a few different ways you can get black flagged, which I think we come on to a little bit later. The umpires also use a whistle to draw attention to the flag, so use a long signal when they put up the flag. They'll do a long sound so that the teams know that there's something happening in the umpire boat. If they have repetitive short sound signals, it means that the boat that was taking a penalty is no longer taking a penalty, and that may be because they've done it incorrectly, or for instance, if the head of the spinnaker was above the gooseneck when they were taking it downwind. And so these are things to listen out for, to make sure that you're taking your penalty correctly. And then when your penalty's done, they'll do a short sound when it's complete and drop the flag. So here we have a few flags out. You'll see the flag in the umpire boat at the back there, and also the crew member there carrying the Y flag, and also the Y flag up on the deck there. Anybody on the boat can wave the Y flag. Kate, do you usually take control of the Y flag, and have you ever had to confiscate a Y flag?
No, luckily I've had relatively in control helms with a Y flag, but we always make sure we have two on the boat. It's quite easy in match racing to have one on a stick for the helmsman, so they can pick it up quickly. But that also means they can throw it overboard quite easily as well. So it's always good to have a backup spare. I used to share it with my helmsman. So if they were in the middle of something, so if it was pre-start, I would often do the flags. And actually, if you both end up doing it, it doesn't matter. At least the umpires will see it. They're not going to penalise you for doing that. It's often so manic at different areas of the course. It is really important to have two on board, and not just to leave it down to the helm.
Yeah, definitely. And there's nothing more disappointing either than seeing the Y flag fly out the back of the boat and then have a load of really good situations come up where you're in the right and you don't get any penalties on. So that's certainly a great tip. Moving on to penalties, and just to go through exactly what the penalties are. And this is an entirely different penalty system to what you'd be used to in fleet racing. So again, it's good to read through that part of the appendix, which tells you exactly what all the manoeuvres are that you need to take. So the penalties were going to be taken after starting and maybe delayed. And by starting, it means you've just got to get your bow across the line, because then you've started. And so you might not have completely crossed the line, but you have got to have crossed. One situation where if you have to take a penalty after the starting signal, then making sure you've actually started before you go into that penalty. Otherwise, the penalty won't count. And there's nothing more disappointing than doing a penalty and not having it count. You're not required to take the penalty unless the umpires signal it. You can if you want to. So if you know it's a sitting duck, you are bang to right, you're going to get a penalty, and you've got a really sneaky opportunity to get that penalty in, then you can take it, but you're not required to do so. The penalty is also specific to the leg of the course that you're on. So when you're going upwind, you've got to jibe and return to a close hold course. And when you're going downwind, you've got to tack and return to a downwind course when you're heading towards that Leeward Mark or the finish. And this is one place where match racing differs to the fleet racing, because it defines when you complete a leg. And that's when your bow goes through the extension of the course from the previous mark. So knowing which leg you're on is also very important, because you might be way above the Windward Mark, battling with the other boat, and have a penalty outstanding, and depending on which side of the line you're on, might depend on which penalty you've got to take, and there are situations that come up when you can do a really cunning penalty because you've controlled the other boat and you're on the right leg to do a good penalty quickly. So smart times to ways and times to take a penalty. Any comments, Kate?
Well, we've mentioned the one at the pin on the finish line, so that's quite a safe option because you know that you have completed the tack around the course because, around the penalty, because you've gone round the pin and you need to get down through the finish line. So that's a good one. If you've got a good lead, then just get it in up. Don't overcomplicate it, get it in upwind and do a jibe round. The problem with doing it downwind is you've got to get the kite down and then hoist it again, and it's a bit trickier. So the safe option is to do it upwind. There's also some other sneaky areas where you can do it, but I think it's going to be that's going to be for another time. I think just trying to catch the other opponent out and getting them on starboard when they're not expecting it, little things like that. But the best times would be upwind.
Yeah, I mean it's definitely something where as you become more experienced in match racing, you get to know in what wind strengths, which is the cheapest way to take the penalty. Is it going to be upwind? Because you can get that, you can whip that turn in really quick, and also depending on the design of the boat, how much lead do you need to get that penalty in at the finish line? So knowing all that information is really vitally important, and is things that you'll pick up with different boats and with more and more experience. Well, I think we're pretty much through everything that we were going to cover. Any final thoughts from you, Kate?
So it's just, I think one thing is match racing is a really cool discipline to get into. You don't need to own your boats. You can turn up at events. It's a really fun environment. You get to learn off each other. So do check out the RAA Match Racing website where there's more information. You've got the youth match racing, you've got some student match racing, you've got the women's match racing. There's loads of different events, and there's a few clubs that do their own match racing as well. So like I said, really cool discipline to get into. It is a bit of trial and error to start with, so don't be too disheartened if you do turn up at an event and it doesn't go quite right. The professionals have been doing it for years and years and dream about it at night. So just give it a go and enjoy it, really.
Yeah, and certainly there's on the other side of the table with the race officials as well, always looking for new enthusiastic umpires, and maybe it is that that you don't fancy being on the boat and you do fancy being an umpire, and the RAA run clinics and seminars and qualifications up to national umpire, and the 2-day course where you learn about how to umpire. And so that's great to get into becoming a race official, because match racing needs umpires. And certainly if you're a sailor, I would certainly advise taking in certainly clinics and seminars for umpires, because it just means that you get a handle on exactly how they work and what they do and what they don't do, and so that you can just get more affinity with the umpires. There's also a call book for match racing, which is produced by World Sailing. It's been around for many years now, and is quite an advanced and mature book. And that goes around the course, and it says, well, in this situation, this is the incident, this is what the umpires call. And that really helps to pull together the sailors and the umpires to make sure that they're all on the same page and going to make consistent calls. And really, it's about making those consistent calls, so that in any given situation, if you know that there's a call that fits your situation, you know what's going to happen, and you know that you're not going to get, well, you hope you're not going to get a random call from the umpire, because it's covered in the call book. If situations that you encounter aren't covered in the call book, then what you can do is you can talk to one of the umpires about putting in a rapid response call, where you would make a diagram and a description of an incident, and then say, well, what should the call be? And maybe you'll say, well, this is what we think the call should be. That would get sent off to the rapid response panel. They would discuss it, and then they would publish those rapid response calls, to really cover those situations that nobody's ever seen before. And that's a good system. And those calls then go forwards and then go into the call book. But yeah, the ROA's got a great setup there with all the different areas for both the sailors and for the officials. Anything else that you want to add?
No, just highlighting again that it's just a sailing race, so don't overthink it, and enjoy it. I just want to say a big thank you to Craig for sharing your knowledge on the rules with us tonight. If anyone has any questions, if you put them in the comments box beneath, we will get back to you as soon as possible with an answer.
Yeah, and I think that, thank you very much as well, Kate. And certainly I think that goes to tactical situations that you've seen, as well as the rules situations that you've seen. Just get the questions in, and we're happy to answer them. Thank you very much for joining us, and we hope you enjoyed it, and see you out on the water.